Chapter 7 of Flowers from the Garden of St. Francis for every day of the year. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7, Month of July. First day. St. Francis said, "Happy he who places all his joy and happiness in the holy words and works of God, and who thus leads others to His holy love in joy, happiness, and bliss." Second day. St. Bridget said, "There is no man, however coldly disposed towards God, who, invoking the name of Mary with a firm resolution not to sin again, will not be for ever delivered from the tyranny of the devil, unless he again entertain the thought of sinning mortally." Third day. St. Francis said, "Happy he who keeps in chains the enemy God has delivered up to him, namely, his body, and who is wise enough to be on his guard against it. For as long as he acts in this manner, no enemy is strong enough to harm him." Fourth day. St. Francis said, "All respect and honour is due to priests. They are our superiors, and above us in dignity. They are the spiritual brethren of all Christians, the spirit and life of the world." Fifth day. St. Francis said, "Let those who know of some fault in a brother not humble him, or even speak of it, but let him rather have compassion on him and hide his sin. For he that is well needs not a physician, but rather he that is sick." Sixth day. Blessed Egidius said, "Men ask of God gifts without end or limit, and yet they serve Him in a very limited way. He who would be recompensed endlessly and without limit must love without limit and without end." Seventh day. Blessed Egidius said, "The more virtue a man possesses, the more he will be tempted, and the greater hatred must he have for vice. The more vices you conquer, the more virtues you acquire." Eighth day. Blessed Egidius said, "There is more virtue in bearing an injury without complaining than in great almsgiving or an austere fast." Ninth day. St. Bonaventure said, "If you are a Christian, show yourself to be such, not only by your words, but in deed and in truth." Tenth day. St. Joseph of Cupertino said, "The most certain way of obtaining any grace from God is holy indifference and a complete resignation to His most holy will." 11th day. St. Francis said, "We never renounce the world as long as we keep in our hearts the dangerous treasure of self-will." 12th day. Blessed Egidius said, "The more vice a man feels within himself, so much the more should he speak of virtue. By often conversing on virtue, one turns to it more easily, and its practice is greatly facilitated." 13th day. St. Leonard of Port Maurice said, "Bodily ailments are ordained by divine providence to strengthen the health of the soul. God sends them to us that we may detach ourselves from the world. Remember, we are mortal, and so withdraw from the dissipation of the world to thoughts more useful and holy." 14th day. St. Francis said, "Obedience is always better than an obtained permission, for in the latter there is something of self-will, whereas in the former there is but the simple accomplishment of the superior's orders." 15th day. St. Francis said, "Supreme wisdom consists in giving one's self up to the practice of good works, watching over oneself, and meditating on the judgment of God." 16th day. St. Francis said, "Better for a spiritual man to suffer cold in his flesh than feel in his soul the least heat of impure passion. 17th day, Blessed Egidius of Assisi said, "If you desire salvation, seek not for consolation from any creature on earth. Falls arising from these consolations are more serious and more frequent than those which happen through afflictions." 18th day, Blessed Bernard of Corleone said, "God will be loved as God, that is to say, with fear, without reserve, in preference to all creatures, and without exception. He will not accept a divided heart, for unless the creature be loved in and for Him, it is like offering Him what the creature has left." 19th day, St. Peter of Alcantara said, "Whoever would draw us from humility, no matter under what pretense, is a ravenous wolf in sheep's clothing, ready to devour in a moment what has cost us so much time and trouble to obtain." 20th day, St. Anthony of Padua said, "However wise a man may be, he should always seek counsel and direction from the ministers of God." 21st day, St. Bernardone of Siena said, "Charity loves submission and self-abasement. She seeks the common good and the advantages of many, not her own convenience." 22nd day, St. Francis said, "Be patient in tribulation, watchful in prayer, strenuous in labours, modest in speech, grave in manners, and grateful for benefits, because for all these things God has prepared for you an eternal kingdom." 23rd day, St. Francis said, "The greater is the function of those who guard the precious body and blood of our Lord, who receive it themselves and communicate it to others. The greater is also the sin of those who speak against them." 24th day, St. Francis said, "Happy he who hoards up in heaven the treasures he gains. He will not wish to let them appear before men, for he knows that God will manifest His works to whom and when He pleases." 25th day, St. Fidelis of Sigmaringen said, "God gave us life by suffering death, so we cannot keep this life except by dying to ourselves. And since our reward is to be eternal, why fear constant suffering on earth?" 26th day, Blessed Egidius said, "Happy he who has charity for all, and yet looks not for it from others, who does great service to his neighbour, and looks for no return." 27th day, Venerable Mary Cherubina said, "There is no better means of growing in love of God than by suffering much for Him. In the same way, the surest sign of a soul loving God is the desire of suffering for Him." 28th day, St. Francis said, "I recommend to you great patience in all events, so that when grieved even to excess by a brother, or whoever it may be, you should receive it as a favour, and desire that and nothing else. Moreover, love those who treat you thus." 29th day, St. Francis said, "Be mild towards sinners, quick to forgive, mortified in your manner of living, poor in dress, gentle in words, and faithful to God and to your duty." 30th day, St. Francis said, "Love all men, those dear to you and those who displease you, for the former are plainly your friends, and the latter are not your enemies." 31st day, St. Catherine of Bologna said, "No one ever yet relied upon his own prudence without, by a just judgment of God, coming to great grief. This enemy is doubly powerful and malicious when linked with self-love. Chapter 8.